Welcome. I'm delighted to have you here. My name is Laura, and I am one of your two Kaplan experts that you get today. I'm teaching with Journey. She'll be available in the chat for any questions that you have. And together, we're here to make you feel better. Your life might be a lot different than you thought it would be. And we understand that. In fact, we worked all weekend taking the latest news from CollegeBoard and making this presentation exactly what you need. So today, to make the most out of your time with us, make sure that you can participate fully in the best way you can. Grab a piece of paper if you like to have paper and pencil handy, or have a tablet open so you can take some notes. This time is for you. As I mentioned, we are Kaplan experts. Between the two of us, we have nearly 5 degrees. So we are here to help you because we're passionate about what we do. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our presentation for today. And let you know exactly, let me move myself. Let you know exactly what we're going to be doing. So within the context of what we've been doing, we have already covered 1200 to 1450. And that was on Thursday. We started 1450 to 1750. That was on Friday. And now we're at part 2 of 1450 to 1750. We are going to work on 1750 to 1900 for the next 2 days. And then Thursday and Friday is all practice, all hour long. So we're going to be looking at specific questions and the techniques you can use to maximize your points. So we've got a lot in store for you, not only today, but throughout the week. So for this session in particular, because you're going to sit back, get ready to learn. I was going to say relax, but learning does take some brain power, and we're ready to put your brain to good use. We're looking at 3 high yield question areas. So we're going to talk about how the test has changed a little bit based on how this year has gone a lot different than you may have thought. But in general, the content's the same. You still need to know what you've been learning all year, and we're here to help you recognize what you feel really comfortable with and what you want to study more. So we have 3 high yield content areas for you today. But we're going to start off with a question. This question, we're going to do it in a very, very specific way. We are going to take a look at the stimulus. We are going to answer a multiple choice question, and then we're going to move it right into a free response question. And the reason is because you will be taking your AP exam at home this year. It's a 45-minute test. I'll go into some more details about that later. But your goal is to take everything you've already been doing and apply it to this new format. And that's what we're here for. We actually really enjoy taking a look at how to maximize exactly what you know and apply it for points on the test. Okay, so first we're looking at the stimulus. So looking at this particular map, you want to think about, whenever you're looking at a map, you want to think about whether or not you're expanding your area or if there could be some sort of conflict and different pieces have been taken over by another group of people. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the question itself. And I'm going to give you 1 minute. I'm going to move this timer over here. All right, go ahead and take the rest of this minute to try to answer this question on your own. All right, So this was our first question that we're doing for the session. Moving forward, if you think you know the answer at any point, you can go ahead and throw that in the chat. Participating will make this feel a lot more engaging. So getting your brain active, getting ready to remember this, because then it will help you on the exam. That's all really important as part of your prep. So let me go ahead and move our timer. So if you feel like you do know the answer, feel free to chime in at any time for any of our questions. This session is for you, so definitely make the most of it. So if you had looked at the map and were considering, oh, it looks like we've got some expansion, well, the question stem itself definitely supplied you with confirmation that you are correct. Yes, there is expansion, and you have to consider how that expansion was possible. So for a multiple choice question, you have options. So if you selected answer choice D, you are doing great. If you did not select answer choice D, consider why that could be. Your action step after you complete a practice question is specific to you. So was it that you didn't feel comfortable with the content? You don't really remember this particular time within history? Were the other answer choices tempting? Well, the good news is this year, you're going to have a free response 45-minute test instead of a longer test with multiple choice questions. The question though is, if there are no multiple choice questions, how would College Board test something like this? Well, it's very possible that they would use a free response question like this one. So taking what we just did and moving it into a free response question, we're going to be applying information from the map, but in a very specific way. And if you have any questions, Journey is going to help you. Also, as we do this free response question, it'll help you to understand the correct answer as well. Awesome. Good job. If you got D, you're on the right track. If you didn't get D, the good news is we're going to help you review the content right now, and you can use all the additional studying you can do before the official exam to help answer this type of free response question. So starting with the prompt itself, it says in the period 1450 to 1750, state building enterprises. So that's just groups of people who said, okay, we want to have a really large area that we control, we make the rules, and we're going to tell people what to do. They achieved and maintained power in a variety of ways. This is a super broad prompt. You could use a lot of different examples. In particular, we're going to use this map. So we have to develop an argument that evaluates how one or more, so you could just pick one, and in this case we need one or more state building enterprise achieved and maintained power. So going on to the process itself, we need to think about our thesis and claim, our contextualization, and our evidence. I'm going to tell you exactly what all of those pieces look like. So the thesis / claim, you need to actually say what example you're going to use. In this particular example, we're going to use this Chinese empire, which is actually a bit of a misnomer, because for this empire, it wasn't the Chinese who were, or at least the Han, who traditionally had controlled China. It's actually going to be Manchu, which is only the second time in history that that had ever happened. But you'll see that in just a moment. So starting with your thesis or claim. All right, so this is an example of one way you could write this. So I'm going to give you a minute or just a few moments to read through what's written here, and then we're going to think about the components that went into this thesis, because you don't have to write it exactly like that. So take a moment to read it, and I'll get my handy dandy tools. We're going to look at this thesis the way a College Board AP World History Modern grader would look at this. The grader doesn't need you to write the most beautiful sentence you've ever written in your whole life. Thank goodness, because that's a lot to ask. Instead, your grader is going to be looking at the substance that you put in it. So looking at the first part of this, it's a fine way to start this, and it helps you to focus. So one state building enterprise in the period 1450 to 1750 that achieved and maintained power. Okay, that helps you focus. If you hadn't included that, and I have another example later in this presentation that doesn't do it exactly like that, that's totally fine. That's not where you're getting your points. Where you're getting your points is naming the specific dynasty and then giving specific information that comes from what you've learned already and is supported by the map. You have to marry those two things. I was talking about that on Friday, that you will get all of your points if you answer the specific question asked and you use whatever stimulus has been provided. So we have nearly tripled the size of China. So the underlines in blue, those are specific pieces of evidence. We have expanded infrastructure. That's not necessarily in the map because there's only physical features. Infrastructure isn't rivers, it's things like canals and roads and bridges. And then this for sure isn't in the picture. This is coming from your base knowledge, incorporating, and actually you don't need that word necessarily. You can say it however you want, but traditional Chinese practices. And then to pacify the general population is just a fancy way of saying is to keep people happy because they were greatly outnumbered. If you come in and start ruling a group of people and you're an outsider and you are outnumbered, you want to make friends quickly. So that's what they did. So this is the first of 3 parts. So you're going to state your thesis. The next part is contextualization. We're going to look at it in just a minute, and then we're going to provide specific evidence. So if you have questions about this, ask Journey. She is a PhD candidate in history. She really knows what she's doing. And with my master's in library science, we might be able to conquer the world. It's very possible. Oh, wait, did I give away our plans? Okay, so keep this thesis in mind. We were talking about a particular dynasty. We're saying what they were able to do. It's supported by the map. They achieved their power by nearly tripling the size of China, expanding infrastructure, and then they maintained it by playing nice with others. Not a bad way to go. Okay, contextualization. This is your time to shine. College Board wants you to think like a historian. You don't have to be a historian. You don't have to actually go out and get a job and be a historian. That would be a tall order. I feel like they're not going to get that to. That's not going to be something they'll be able to sell. That would be a hard sell. But you do have to do it when you're taking this 45-minute FRQ exam. So the contextualization, you need to think about how this happened. How did we get here? So here is an excellent example. So go ahead and take a moment to read it, and then we're going to look at the pieces of it that made it such a great sentence. And actually in this case too. All right, so contextualization. Again, you can write this in a lot of different ways. What the graders are looking for is substance. So we have contextualization. You don't have to give the specific decade, but knowing that the Ming dynasty came before this one is helpful. That dynasty had declined and was taken over by a really weak army. It was a very, very short-lived dynasty. Obviously, if you're not going to be able to defend yourself, you're not going to stay in power. What's most important is who came next. And they were to the northeast of China. You don't necessarily have to put that in. So this is the most detailed test expert-like answer. And we're providing it for you so that you can see what you could, like if you think of this as a sandwich, if you wanted to pack it full of so many ingredients, all of which are very helpful, you can pare it down a little bit though. You want to just provide as much detail as possible to show the contextualization. So contextualization helps to explain how did we get here? And the answer is the Ming dynasty started to decline. Another dynasty took over, very short-lived, and then along come the Manchu and they say, oh, hey, this looks like a good idea. We know what we're doing. We can be very fierce. We can use our better army, which is why the multiple choice question was answer choice D. They had a more powerful military force. That's why. They were just better at fighting. So they came in. So that's why the correct answer to the multiple choice was D. So there's this really powerful group of people. They come in, they take over, but they know since they're outnumbered, they have to make nice with the people who were already there. It's a good practice. So the contextualization, again, is to bridge ideas of other events that happened before or after. Now, our final piece that we're going to be doing is the evidence. All right, let's get some evidence. Go ahead and take a moment to read that, and then we'll piece it together and figure out exactly why it's a fantastic answer. Okay, here's a great piece that you can include in your answers on the test. As shown in the map, or as stated in the passage, or as depicted in the image, it's not a lot of words, but it packs a punch. You are showing the grader, hey, I actually looked at what you gave me. Of course you looked at what they give you, but you actually have to say it for them to know for sure, oh, right, they are incorporating the evidence. And then you're providing additional facts that you happen to know. So as shown in the map, the dynasty greatly expanded its territory. And then here are the pieces that you should remember from what you've learned in school already. So they had a really large army. Now I mentioned they played nice with others. That's why they were really successful when they took over at the time that they did. So the way they had it, they had a whole system and they used banners. And it was based on social standing. And when they took over another group of people, they added another banner, another group, another social standing within their organization. And that's how they were able to be really successful. So when you have finished your FRQ, you have provided a thesis, you gave additional information about what happened before to come to this point. Like how you just people come walking in a country and are like, hey, we live here now. Nice to see you. Great. This is going to be good. Really comfy here. It's just not how it works. You have to give some contextualization. And then you have evidence and you use a really specific phrase as shown in, and then fill in the blank. The map, the passage, what they give you. Some FRQs aren't going to have any stimuli, and we'll show you how to do those too. So I'm throwing a lot of information at you right now. The good news is we're going to practice some more, and we're here all week. All right, so let's take a deep breath. And let's see what we have next. Go ahead and clear out my underlining and move right on ahead to reiterate what I've been saying. So for this year only, you're going to be taking a 45-minute FRQ exam. So free response questions. You're going to take it at home. You can use a computer, a tablet, or even your phone. And this isn't a new system. CollegeBoard has been doing this for decades, not necessarily online, but having a 45-minute free response question version of APs, because sometimes things happen, unforeseen things happen, and students need to be able to get their college credit. You worked all year. You really want your college credit. I mean, you didn't take the class just because it was that's why you did, right? You were like, oh, this is so fun. I'm going to take it. I'm going to love it. I mean, maybe you did, but most people want the college credit. So we want to make sure you get that. So one thing to keep in mind is that AP, actually everyone. So CollegeBoard does APs. The colleges you're applying to, they're interested in what's happening with you. Your parents care, your teachers care. Here at Kaplan, we care. We all want you to feel comfortable going into the exam. What that means is they're not testing the last three units. And that's all in the time period 1900 to the present. It's not on the test because it would be unfair of us to expect you to teach yourself at home without being able to go into school and learn from your teacher. So they cut this down. This is across the board. You can go online to check out what else they've cut across the board for other APs. So we're all in this together. We want to make sure you have the best possible experience, and we want to make sure that you get the college credit that you're looking for. And that's the plan. And awesome participation in the chat. Keep it going. Journey's right there. We love chatting to you all, and you're going to continue to chat with us, especially about the content, because we are going to move right into our very first high content area. So we picked out 3 specific high content areas for today. High content areas mean that as Kaplan experts, we've gone through hundreds. You can see the excitement in my face, right? We've gone through hundreds and hundreds of pages. It does take some time for us to go through all of the information CollegeBoard has and all of the official test questions, but we were able to pinpoint some areas that are very likely to show up on exams. And one of them happens to be this particular time period in India. So we're looking at 1526. You don't need to know that exact date unless you want to use it in one of your FRQs as a piece of evidence, as a piece to put in your very delicious sandwich. So we have the start of the empire, which is then followed by stability and religious harmony. And that's why we often talk about this particular period of India, because you can draw parallels from other regions and time periods. So this religious harmony was very successful, and it was done so in a particular way. So creating a religion is a great way to legitimize your rule and to blend religions. So this is a key point you're going to keep in mind. You want to blend religions. Keep that in mind. I promise you, you'll see that in a moment. So legitimizing your rule, and then, okay, you don't know which religion to pick. You want to help people to feel unified. Great, make a new one. Smush things together, perfect. I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but it's the essential idea. And then promoting intermarriage, that in particular is something to note, because that is something to look at within other groups of people. That is not necessarily the case. There are plenty of other instances, thinking about Japan, in which intermarriage was actually forbidden. So it depends on who was ruling at the time and what their goal was and how they wanted to proceed. So remember, marrying the 2 religions is going to come in handy for this question. I'm going to go ahead and give you 1 minute. Think about what we just talked about, and go ahead and throw your answer in the chat as soon as you know it. Awesome. Everyone who answered A, that's why I was saying awesome, because we have people answering A. You are 100% correct. I mentioned marrying. What word looks like marrying? Integration. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to use this information to help us answer an FRQ. So let's take a look at what our task is, and we're going to do those 3 things I mentioned before, which is your thesis, contextualization, and evidence. Okay. We are going to actually be doing the same thing as we did before. This case, we're looking at India, not China. So here we have our thesis and claim. Thesis/claim. It depends on what type of FRQ you're doing. Go ahead and take a minute to read that, and we'll pick apart the pieces of this delicious sandwich. And you may have noticed that I got a little type happy when I was typing. Go ahead and cross out that part. Okay, and actually that brings up a good point. So in this case, it was because I was typing. Well, hey, let's think about this. When you take your FRQ at home, FRQ 45-minute test for this year, you will have the choice to either type or to write on your paper and take a picture. If you type, you may wind up with the same issue that I had. The question is, will they take off points if you have a typo? The good news is they are looking for content. So thank goodness you're not going to lose any points if you have a typo. Really, they want to know what you know, not necessarily how well you can type. Granted, you have to make it legible so they know what you're talking about. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the first part of this particular thesis is really to keep yourself focused. You don't have to include it. It's just a great way to start off so you know which direction you're heading in. So you're going to name specifically what dynasty or what group of people who is in charge. You are going to mention specific information, so academic stability, religious harmony, and then you're going to connect it to the picture. So remember when we were doing China, I had put into, and this is all stuff that I helped develop from the book that I worked on, AP World History Prep Plus. Okay, so when I was looking at this book over the weekend, I made sure that I wrote a thesis that specifically mentioned the stimulus. So in the one we did with China, if you remember back to the map, I said nearly tripled the size of China. That's something specific from the map. For this one, the piece that is specifically from the stimulus is architecture of that time. So make sure your thesis, if there's a stimulus, they have to be directly connected. That is going to give you the most points possible. That's the goal. All the points. Who doesn't want all the points? I want all the points. Next up, we have contextualization. Okay, so as I mentioned, you don't necessarily need to know the date unless you want to, oh, look at this, use it in an FRQ. So this is the most sophisticated, best answer you could possibly have, although you could write it in a lot of different ways. So you can certainly streamline your sentence or sentences, but for the most delicious sandwich you could possibly get, chock full of lots of ingredients, it would be this. So let's take it apart, see what contextualization we have. So we have, this would be before the Taj Mahal was built. And then connecting the person who started it with the person who started the divine faith, which combined the two religions. And then it's represented in the architecture. Okay, that's a lot of moving pieces, but that's the nature of AP World History. You're going to connect the dots. That's where you're going to get the most amount of points. So you have the start of the dynasty. Then you have the person who started it, his grandson created a religion that combined Islam and Hinduism. And then you have examples of that combination in this picture. So the contextualization connected the points, and then next up, the evidence is going to state specifically what's in this picture, this image, that shows the marrying of those two pieces. So it seems like a lot of connecting, but the more you practice it, the easier it is for you to connect those dots. It becomes a super easy task for you if you know exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish. So for our evidence, I'll show you the very, very, very specific part that you want to put in. Okay, so the first part is just saying is one of the greatest examples of this type of architecture. Great. The piece that the graders are looking for are what specifically are those two different pieces. Pardon me. So the domes and the arches are more Islamic and the ornamentation is Hindu. So that's the specific evidence that comes from the stimulus. So what we did was we started with a multiple choice question. We saw how the correct answer was based on what we reviewed in the high yield content area. Then we turned this, we pivoted a little bit and looked at it as an FRQ. And that's why we hope you'll join us for the whole week, because we want to be your experts in guiding you from what you've been doing, which likely all this year, you've been doing a lot of multiple choice questions, definitely some FRQ, but now we have to focus our efforts on FRQ. So we want you to feel comfortable taking the knowledge that you have, and rather than using process of elimination, we want you to be able to get all your points for the FRQ. So come and hang out with us, and we will help you with that. So speaking of helping you, I lost my cursor. Hold on one sec. Here we go. All right. Our second content area is systems of forced labor. Not the most fun topic, but really important in understanding how the world changed. It certainly affected what happens after this in 1750 to 1900. This is an important period for the entire world, and how not only did it affect economies, of course, but people's lives definitely changed and certainly changed the course of history. So understanding exactly how many people were moved, it was not a small amount, 15 million, and at that time is even more considerable than nowadays, and how that set up triangular trade. In particular, when you think of how music, dress, mannerisms, all of that came over and mixed with the cultures that were already in the Americas, that's the cultural side of things, and that will continue on throughout the centuries afterwards. Thinking about the economy side of things, if you consider Africa, in exchange for people, arms, guns were given. And that definitely, as there was more instability, that definitely changed the course of African history, because all of the people who were disagreeing with one another had weapons. I can tell you as a mother of a 2-year-old that when she's arguing with me, supplying her with a weapon would not be helpful. So definitely as disagreements continued, having people armed was not a good idea in any case. So we've got different components here. We have the fact that vast amounts of people were moved. Cultures interacted, that's the good news. Certainly the Europeans were happy with the arrangement in terms of economy. Not good news for Africa, not surprisingly, but really cool interactions with cultures. This is often an area that students feel comfortable about because they've seen it not just within world history, but within US history as well. So bank on that. Know your areas of strength and use those for your FRQs. So start to check in with yourself and decide, okay, what do I know a lot about? And how can I make that into an FRQ answer? Looking specifically at the encomienda system, you want to know 3 different components. So the fact that it started and then was adapted so that it was a little more fair, still not the best. And then there was a whole different system where groups of people were asked to do state projects. That did not go well. So because thousands of people were asked to work on particular infrastructure projects, they would try to not fulfill that duty, and then it caused great unrest. So knowing that that started a whole other system as well is important there. But if you feel more comfortable talking about a different part of history rather than this one, think about that as well. What are you an expert in already? What do you want to become an expert in? For example, maybe Russia's your thing. So Russian serfdom is interesting. It's considered serfdom, but essentially forced servitude. So thinking of the commonalities among these, you want to consider what rights people had and what they were able to do with their lives within the system. So that's a good way to compare them. In particular, we are going to look at the slave trade of Africa. We are going to answer a multiple choice question, and then we're going to look at the FRQ. So this is the format that we're using for today, so that we can help you bridge the gap between the types of questions you've been answering already and then the FRQs you're going to need to answer for your exam. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my handy dandy timer, and you may begin. Throw your answer in the chat as soon as you have it. I'm loving the participation in the chat. Fabulous. Yes. And well, not only do I like participation, but when you're correct, that's even better. So yes, plantation agriculture, most certainly. And what we're going to do now is take a look at how this map can be used to support the 3 parts of the FRQ that we were talking about already. Awesome work. And if you didn't get it right, think about which part of the incorrect answer was tempting, or if you didn't understand the question stem, and definitely Journey can help you through any questions that you have. Okay, so for this one, we could have had the map as a stimulus, but I wanted to give you an example of when you have just a plain question. So we will find out in a few weeks what the specific format of this test is going to be, the 45-minute test you're going to take. In the meantime, we're giving you a variety of different things so that you can be ready for just about anything. So we have this prompt. We have in the period 1450 to 1900. So this is wider than what we were looking at. So this session is 1450 to 1750. Not surprisingly, there wasn't somebody standing, oh, yep, yep, we're at 751, guys. Yep, wrap it up. We're done with this era of history. So some of the prompts are going to span more than one time period, and that's okay. So we're looking to talk about significant economic changes in the areas of agriculture and industry occurred throughout the world, impacting demand for labor. Demand for labor is 1450 to 1750 high yield content area. So we have to develop an argument that evaluates how labor systems changed as a result of increased demand for labor in this time period. Okay, hold on. Let's figure out what all that meant. Okay, so we need how labor systems change because there was an increased demand for labor. Okay, well, if there had been a stimulus like that map, the slave trade of Africa, that would have been an example of the impact of populations, the impact on populations from this increased demand for labor. All right, we're going to need to start with a thesis. And then we'll need contextualization and then some evidence. So starting with our thesis. And again, the very first part of this, you don't necessarily have to write, but go ahead and take a minute to look at it, and then we'll talk about the pieces of this delicious sandwich. Okay, so again, the very first part is just to help you focus and make sure you're answering the right question. You can or cannot include it, it's up to you. So the idea that slavery became more widespread shows that you are connecting the dots and explaining how it didn't start off as immediately huge demand. It was actually because of a specific reason And you'll see that next in the contextualization. So it was redirected across the Atlantic. So rather than using native populations, it was a transfer of humans across the Atlantic to meet the increased demand for labor, which then matches what is stated in the question itself. And this is just one example. So the slave trade is one example. There are multiple examples. And as I mentioned before, you want to use whatever makes the most sense to you. So let's say there's one test this year that you felt the best about. You got a great grade. You felt really confident. Go back over that test. If you have access to your test or your notes that you looked at before the test, use that. Don't invent something new. Use what you already have. Definitely make it as easy as possible on yourself. Okay, here's the contextualization. So we're starting with the idea of the Columbian Exchange and how it definitely was good for the Americas and Europe in certain ways, certainly Europe in a lot of ways. It negatively impacted American populations by introducing disease and exploitative labor systems. So obviously not a good thing. But the ingredients within this that are really helpful to include, we've got the Columbian Exchange, we have crops and livestock, and then the negative parts are the disease. I apologize for it being a little crooked here. Disease and exploitative labor systems. So those are the helpful ingredients. All right, let's back it up with some evidence. So there isn't a stimulus for this. That means that we're going to have to dig into our brains and use evidence. So your evidence is the fact that because of that contextualization, the fact that diseases were introduced, it was the decline in the population that then led to the movement of people to support cash crops. So there's 3 pieces here. Okay, so this part is 1, this part here, that's the first step. Then it led to this, and it's because of this. So number 1 led to 2. I don't know why it's going uphill, but it is. Led to 2 because of 3. So I wrote that out because we have been talking about connections all day long, and the strongest FRQ responses aren't going to just be a laundry list. This. Okay, great, that's true, but why? Number 1 led to number 2 because of number 3. If you can think of your responses in that manner of you connecting, either saying because or after or to prevent, and then explaining why, that is going to be a fabulous response if you have all those pieces. And again, it doesn't have to be this particular example. It can definitely be something that you feel more comfortable with if this isn't your jam, which is fine. And Journey is giving you excellent information in that chat. So anything that you feel like you want to remember for next time, make sure you write it down either on paper or on a tablet, because we're ready now for our final high yield content area. Okay, so we've been working for a little while now. We've got about 10 minutes left. We are going to focus on the Protestant Reformation. We're going to see if we can connect it to some other ideas. We're going to answer 1 multiple choice question and 1 FRQ. That is our final mission, should we choose to accept it. We are ready. First, some content review. So, Martin Luther, important dude. He at first wasn't so famous, and then he became really famous. In fact, if you happen to know the name of what he nailed on that church door, feel free to throw in the chat. If you don't remember it, you can have a great FRQ response without it. You want to know, however, he had some issues to talk about. He was not happy. He didn't like the way, so he was a priest, he didn't like the way the church was conducting itself, and he wanted to let them know. His idea was so well embraced by people that it quickly spread and unfortunately came to a violent conclusion with the 30 Years' War. So those are all the key components of the Protestant Reformation. 95 theses is correct. Yep, he was really sure. He had a whole list. Speaking of laundry lists, he had one, an extensive one, to tell people. And he was instrumental in having people reevaluate their relationship with the church and decide if it was the way they wanted to have their religion unfold. So, speaking of indulgences, we have a passage that we are then, so this next FRQ is going to be stimulus-based. We're going to use this passage for both. So I'm going to go ahead and give you 1 minute for the multiple choice question, and then we'll move into the FRQ. Remember, this is your last multiple choice question. Throw your answer in the chat as soon as you have one. We've got answers coming in. I love it. Not only the participation, but the accuracy. So the good news is if you read the passage and you have an understanding of what it's saying, you're going to get to answer choice D. Awesome. Fabulous work, everyone. I am very excited to see that. Okay, so apparently there is a system where if you felt like maybe you weren't being the most religious person, you could just spend some money and get a letter that said, oh, it's all cool. Don't worry, you're all good. It's an interesting system. It worked for a lot of people until Martin Luther said, wait a second, I don't know about this. Maybe we should reconsider. So thinking about this, we're going to now apply that uncomfortable feeling that Martin Luther had in questioning what was happening with the church. And we're going to apply it to an FRQ, keeping in mind that if you have a different example, you could use that too. So we're going to stick with the same stimulus. I just moved it over so that we can have some room on the left side. So we've got this prompt. So this FRQ wants you to consider the new ways of thinking about the nature of humanity and the world. You have to develop an argument that evaluates how new ways of thinking created an atmosphere that encouraged debate and criticism of the existing order in this time period. Okay, 300 years is a long time. Protestant Reformation isn't the only example of this. It's the one we're using here because it has the stimulus. But if it didn't have stimulus and you wanted to use something else, you most certainly could. Go with what you know well. Since we are going to use the Protestant Reformation, let's see what a really great thesis would look like. So it started with an intellectual critique about the corruption. And then the piece that really makes this an excellent answer is explaining that it did then have widespread public support, because there's other stuff that's happened in history that has been about questioning authority, but didn't pick up steam. This one, however, did, given that it spread to countries within a very short amount of time, entire countries. Okay, so thesis, we're done, right? You just write a thesis, right? That's all you have to do for an FRQ. No, that's just silly. You have to make sure you provide that contextualization and some evidence. That would be an interesting test if all you had to do is write your thesis. And college would be much different. Okay, let me go ahead and grab my cursor. We're going to clear this out. And we are going to go on to contextualization. I love it. Yeah. So actually, the Enlightenment and Scientific Revolution, absolutely. That's one way to do contextualization. Another way is to think the period before. What part of history helped to bring about both of those, the Scientific Revolution and the Enlightenment? And that's actually going to be the Renaissance. So think about this. Let's say you're answering this question and you're like, oh my gosh, there's something called, I can't remember. It sounds like it has to do with a light bulb. And you can't for the life of you remember the word enlightenment. Good news, you probably can remember the word Renaissance or something else. So don't put so much pressure on yourself to remember one teeny tiny piece of history when there's a whole bunch of examples you could use that you might actually have in your brain already and not have to scramble for something. So use that to your advantage. So for this contextualization, which is just one way to do it, the Renaissance makes sense because it inspired an area of exploration. Perfect. That helps people to consider their place in the world, their place in society, how they feel about their religion, if they feel like something should change. That works just as well. So using whatever you already have in your memory banks is going to be really helpful. So the pieces of this, because we always want to point out what made this sandwich so delicious. And I keep calling it a sandwich because I imagine all the ingredients going into these sentences, because you can write them a bunch of different ways. We have contextualization from a prior period. We talk about inspiring an area of exploration, in this case, intellectual exploration. And then we have debate and criticism of existing order. So Renaissance didn't say, okay, now we're going to discuss the Catholic Church. The idea of the Renaissance was to explore people's place within society, as I was saying, and their feeling about how they interact with people in authority. And now we're done, right? Thesis, contextualization. Oh, right, just kidding, evidence. And the reason why I'm doing that is for you to start mimicking that as you're writing your FRQ responses. Also, by the way, you can't actually practice FRQs without writing them. I've actually studied this extensively because I have had students over the years who really, really, really want to study without writing things down, which for some tests might work depending. Let's say you have a vocab test, you could probably study for the whole thing without writing a single word. FRQs are different. So you can type it, that's totally fine, but you do actually have to write out your response. You can't just brainstorm it. I know, big bummer. You can do a lot of brainstorming activities and you don't have to write out every single one. You watch a lot of videos, you can attend sessions like this one, but you actually gotta write to practice. I'm sorry if that's a bummer, but I'm here to tell you the truth so that you can do great on your exam. So if you were doing this particular FRQ, you would then write down some evidence. Let's see what that evidence looks like. Go ahead and take a few seconds to look through that. All right, so this is the piece that took what's in the stimulus and brought together what you already have in your head. And it could have gone even further. There's specific stuff in here, like mentioning the indulgences, that could have been included in the evidence. Depending on what type of FRQ this is, you could take a lot of pieces from the passage itself, whatever the stimulus is providing, but make sure you paraphrase. You don't want to just take out whichever sentence you like best and restate it. You can state smaller pieces of it, but you have to put it in your own words. You know you understand it. You actually have to write it out in a way that the grader understands that you actually got what they were saying. So the ingredients in this particular delicious sandwich that worked really well, if you wanted to add some direct quotes from or paraphrases from the stimulus you could. But regardless of doing that, you want to make sure that you state evidence that you've learned. So Martin Luther most certainly encouraged people to read the Bible for themselves. So cut out the middleman or middle person. And divine salvation, this goes specifically to the Theses. Indulgences, he thought, was an atrocity. It was a system that just didn't make any sense because divine salvation is through an individual's faith. And that brings all the pieces together. So this is not something that you roll out of bed in the morning knowing how to do. You don't wake up and think, oh my goodness, I can grade every FRQ I've ever wanted. You actually have to practice. So we sincerely hope that you're going to come back tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. I get really excited because I am that big of a dork, and join us so that we can walk you through these pieces. You did such a great job for coming here. It's an hour. You spent an hour with us doing something that is so important for you to get your college credit. You've been studying all year. Let's make sure you get your points. Journey and I will be here with you all week. We are delighted that you're able to join us today. We certainly hope to see you again, and we're here for you. See you soon.